Hello everybody. I thought it would be helpful to see a walkthrough of solutions to the problem set. So we're going to start with the first one that wasn't a warm-up. We're going to start with number 2. It's helpful to be able to think about what each line is doing in English. So here I've written it down in English. This first line makes an empty list. The for loop is going to repeat 10 times. This line of code makes a random number. Here we add the random number to the end of the list. And here we display the whole list. Writing it down in English is going to make it a lot easier to think about and a lot easier to find silly bugs if you have them. Okay, so let's do this problem. It says, after the for loop, add code to get the last element from the list and save it into a new variable. Add code to get the first element. So the first major mistake I saw a lot of people make, which is understandable, is if I asked you to get the first thing in the list, people said get, and then they gave the location number 1. So the hard thing to remember when you're starting to program is that the first location is always 0. So if I say get the first thing in the list, you want location 0. Like this. The second thing is getting the last location. This would work if you get location 9 because there's 10 things in the list. There's a pattern that's going to be really important for you later, because later you're not going to actually know how many things are in the list unless you use numlist.size. So the pattern to notice is the location of the last element is always 1 smaller than the total number of things in the list. So 10 things. Here, maybe this is better. So if you say numlist.size, it's going to give you 10 because there's 10 things in the list. But if you want to get the last location, that's 1 smaller than the size of the list. So a couple of people did this. They said get numlist.size. And that's a great idea. Oops. And that's a great idea. Except that numlist.size is going to be 10. If you try and get location 10, that's an error. It's index out of bounds. So the correct solution would be inside the parentheses for get, you're going to ask what's the size, and then you're going to subtract 1. So it's this long expression for getting the last element. And this is a pretty common expression. Programmers type that kind of thing all the time. Okay, let me say one last thing about number 2 before we look at the next one. It's important that I put this line of code before the loop. Imagine what would have happened if I'd put this line of code inside the loop. You might not be able to guess unless you read the English version. If you just look at the code, you might just think, okay, I'm looping and I've got a list and I'm adding things to it. But if you look at it in English, I'm going to repeat 10 times, making an empty list and making a random number and adding it. Whoops. But if I repeat this again, I'm resetting my list every single time in the loop. So I'm never adding more than 1 thing to it, because every time I repeat, I clear the list when I make a new one. So you'll see that as an error that some people had coming up in the next couple of problems. Okay, so problem 3 says we want a deck of cards that contain the values from 2 to 13, including 13. All right, so here I am. I've got a new array list called deck. If I want to add the values from 2 to 13, a nice thing to do would be actually to use my loop control variable. So I'll start the loop control variable at 2. I'll go up to and including 13. What I saw some people were doing was saying deck.add, and then they were trying to make random numbers here. So for example, they'd have like math.random times 13, or they'd say 2 plus math.random times 11. The reason that you don't want random numbers is because we want every single value between 2 and 13. But if you're adding random numbers, there's the possibility you just add the same number over and over and over again, because that might randomly happen. So instead, a better solution is just add I when I goes from 2 to 13, because then the first time through the loop, you're adding 2, and then the next time through the loop, you're adding 3, and so on. Let's go ahead and display what it looks like afterwards, just to see that it worked. And then we'll do part B. Whoops, excuse me. Okay, one more time. So then part B for the problem says, instead of just, so here's my list, and you can see it's got 2 through 13. So then the next part of the problem says, in an actual deck of cards, there's not just one card that has the value 2. There's 4 cards that have the value 2, and 4 cards that have the value 3, and so on. So the prompt says we want to add 4 copies of each value. Probably the easiest way to do that is to just add 4 copies of each value. So when you go through the loop and I equals 2, now we're adding 2 4 different times. Let's take a look and see what that looks like. As you can see, we've got 2 number 2s and 4 number 2s and 4 number 3s and 4 number 4s and so on. Several students realized that instead of copy pasting 4 times, what we really want to do is repeat this one statement 4 times, and you can do that with another for loop. So use a different loop counter. Instead of I, we can say j, and we want to loop 4 times, so we'll say j less than 4, j plus plus. Now I can delete the rest of this. So if you think about what this is doing, this part that's highlighted is repeating 4 times adding I. And then this part changes what I equals. So this would be probably the most sophisticated answer, but there's nothing wrong with copying and pasting this first one 4 times for where you guys are right now. So let's look at a solution to the to-do list problem. This one involves a grocery list. Here, this student is looping 10 times, and every single time she repeats, she's creating a blank list, asking somebody to type something they need to do, adding that item to the end of the list, printing out how many things are in the list, and then repeating. So if we watch what happens, well, here, let's do this. So something you can watch step by step is if you click here in the margin, that adds something called a breakpoint. And then you can click the little bug button, or up here, you could click play and then the little green bug. And that will run it in debug mode. Debug mode will run your code, but it will pause right on the breakpoint here. And then you can hit this button right here that says step over. It looks like a little up-down arrow. And you can run your code 1 line at a time. So here I'm going to run 1 line, and you'll see that it says I equals 0. So right now we're in the first repeat where our loop variable equals 0. So now I press the down arrow, and you see it's created, down here it says grocery list size 0, because we just created a clean new grocery list right on that line. And now I'll click it again, and it's going to open up a window. Here it is, I had to dig for it, so type something you need to do. I need to eat 10 pies. And now, you can see back in the program, the string grocery right here. If I hover over it, or if I click on it and then hover over it, it says eat 10 pies. So the IntelliJ editor knows what I typed, and it'll tell you what's in the variable. So now I'm on this line of code. It says grocery list is size 0, and I'm just about to add what I typed to the end of the list. So let's click the button again. And now you can see grocery list size equals 1. And then we'll click one more time to print it out. And if we go to the console here, it says you now have 1 item in your to-do list. Okay, so now we're back up at the top. Now you see I equals 1 because we added 1 to I, and so now we're going through the loop for the second time. So here's where it all goes wrong. If we step over again, if you look, grocery list is back to size 0 because this line creates an empty list. So we've reset the grocery list variable to be an empty list. So this code is almost right. The only problem is that we recreate the list with every single loop. So if this student just creates the list outside the loop, and what happens inside the loop is only what she wants to add, then it'll be a great solution to the problem. Okay, I hope this was helpful. We'll do another round of practice with this because this is a little bit tricky the first time you learn it.